Posted by John David Anderson. Chapter 12, The Rules. Bench's favorite color was orange. This is probably not something I should know. Maybe if we'd been friends since kindergarten, or were a couple of fourth graders swapping one of those secret password journals you can find in the bargain section of the bookstore. But it's not something that just came up naturally in conversation. Until I went into his bedroom for the first time and saw his tangerine walls and his blinding bright orange bedspread, making me wonder how he ever managed to get to sleep at night. I know other things about Bench. Things that even his parents probably don't. Like he's a little ashamed of his dad because Mr. Jones used to be a runner, track and cross country, and now he carries a serious gut and can barely huff it a mile. I know Bench is still terrified of letting his dad down, which is one of the reasons he tries so hard to get straight A's and make it onto every team. I know that it takes him twice as long to get through a book as me. I know that he has an irrational fear of his teeth falling out due to the fact that when he was little, his grandmother's dentures accidentally came loose and dropped into her potato soup. I know that he hates it whenever Dee Dee shouts, "For the Shire!" which is more often than necessary, to be honest. And I know now that even though he never came out and said it, even though he always seemed cool about it, he never really liked his nickname. Because let's face it, nobody wants to spend their life just sitting around waiting for their chance to get into the game. We were playing at Wolf's this time. His dad was gone all weekend for a conference, which meant the house would be quiet for a change. We usually played at Dee Dee's, but Wolf pointed out the injustice of making Dee Dee's parents foot the bill for snacks every time. Everything they say about teenage boys and their appetites is true. We once polished off an entire family-sized pack of Oreos in one night. 48 cookies, minus the crumbs on Mrs. Patel's linoleum. Dee Dee was the only one who couldn't keep his dozen down, scrambling for the toilet to make a deposit in a hurry. These were the kinds of stories we kept to ourselves. I showed up to Wolf's early, eager to get out of my own house and away from Mom, who was on the phone with the lawyer discussing alimony. She and Dad never talked to each other directly. They would email or text if absolutely necessary. She had no problem yelling at her lawyer, though, so I said I'd just bike the 3 miles to Wolf's house. When I got there, his mom was trying to finish raking the front yard before it got dark. Hardly any leaves had fallen yet, but Mrs. Thompson was finicky about her lawn. Every hedge perfectly trimmed, every tree pruned. The grass had those diagonal mow lines that you usually only see on golf courses. She asked me how I was doing. How was school? The usual. She asked about Mom. She didn't ask about Dad. Nobody ever asked about Dad. I'd hoped that Wolf would be practicing so that I could listen, but I spotted him in the garage instead. He was working on a plastic model of the battleship Arizona, the one you could still see sunk at Pearl Harbor. I could smell the glue from the driveway. Piano was Wolf's passion, but he was almost as obsessed with those plastic kits. When he wasn't stuck to his bench pounding out Beethoven, he was snapping pieces together, making sports cars and fighter jets that would take up the shelves in his bedroom. The ones that didn't hold piano awards, because those were all downstairs. He had Mustangs, F-15s, even a German U-boat. He had a model of the Starship Enterprise and the Apollo lunar model. I remember the first time he showed me in his room. It was like walking into a museum, with fighter planes hanging from the ceiling and an aircraft carrier, also called the Enterprise, extending past both sides of his dresser. I'd never built one of those kits before. I would have glued my fingers together. Besides, I didn't have Wolf's patience. The first time I accidentally broke something off, I'd probably just toss the whole thing in the trash. Dee Dee texted, "He's on his way," Wolf said, sensing me standing there. I nodded and walked around the garage until I spotted Wolf's brother's moped, half covered in black tarp. Everybody's known for something. Wolf's older brother Simon was known for that bike. A Tao 150cc cherry apple given to him as a consolation prize the same time Wolf got the shiny black Baldwin piano sitting in the living room. Simon had just started middle school at the time, and Wolf said that everyone thought the moped was the coolest thing ever. Then Simon went to high school with juniors and seniors who drove things on four wheels that could actually hit the speed limit, and the moped suddenly wasn't so cool anymore. Which explained why it sat in the corner of Wolf's garage. "Your brother ever planning to sell this thing?" I asked. Wolf shook his head, fidgeted with a rudder. "You kidding? He still loves that bike. He says I can have it when I turn 14, provided I give him $100. He still lets me ride it sometimes, though, if I clean his room and put away his laundry." I lifted the tarp a little. The bike looked like it was still in good shape. I'd probably clean Simon's room for a chance to take it around the block. Does he ever let you take it out on the highway? You know, open her up, full throttle. I didn't even know if you could open up a moped. Wolf laughed. "Dude, full throttle in that thing is about 50, and that's if you're going downhill. Uphill, you still have to hop off and walk it." He carefully put a radar dish in place, stepped back to admire his work. "Did you hear anything from Bench?" He said it casual, like he didn't care about the answer either way. Maybe he didn't, but I doubted that. It had been my job to call Bench and make sure he knew about tonight. It was 3 hours before he called me back. He said he couldn't make it. He's going out to dinner with his family to celebrate last night's game. "The catch," Wolf said. "The catch," I repeated. The catch had actually made the paper, local sports page, local paper, and only a 2-paragraph article, but Bench's name was mentioned. "A miraculous 40-yard catch and run by Jeremiah Jones coming off the bench to seal the victory for the Falcons." I was sure his parents had already clipped it and framed it. I kept our copy of the sports section just in case. I sensed there was something else Wolf wanted to say about the catch, but instead he just screwed the cap back on the glue and began putting the rest of the unused pieces back in the box. The battleship was only half finished. It was in need of more guns and a whole lot of paint, but it looked pretty good. Wolf's work always did. "His loss," Wolf said. "I'm sure we can tackle anything that pathetic excuse of a dungeon master throws at us." "Just for that, I'm adding more zombies." We both turned. Dee Dee stood in the driveway. An overstuffed Avenger's backpack threatened to topple him backwards. "Your mom says that if we bag those leaves, we can get pizza." I smiled and nodded. I'm not sure what Mr. Thompson's problem was. Seemed to me like Mr. Thompson knew the ways straight to a man's heart. We went out to bag leaves. Afterward, Wolf's mum ordered an extra large pepperoni and promised to leave us alone for the rest of the evening, retreating to her bedroom to enjoy some quiet time, which Wolf translated for us as reading mystery novels and stalking people on Facebook. We thanked her for the pizza, and we promised not to break anything. "How's it going?" I whispered to Wolf as his mother padded upstairs. "She's been happy today," Wolf said with a shrug. "I like it when they're happy, even if it's only one at a time." I didn't bother to say that with me it was always one at a time. He was right, though. A happy one was better than a miserable two most days. While we waited for the pizza, Dee Dee unzipped his pack and pulled out the library of manuals that he'd brought, complete with maps and traps and cardboard tokens representing everything from zombie rats to vampire lords. He unloaded a small hoard of dice that skittered across the table. Wolf and I picked up a handful and challenged each other to roll the highest number. Dee Dee yelled at us to leave the dice alone. This wasn't rock, paper, scissors, he told us. Dungeons and Dragons was serious business. I told him he should be extra thankful to have us as friends, especially since he'd forgotten the Pringles. The doorbell rang. Dee Dee and I both looked at the clock. We had called for pizza only 10 minutes ago. "Maybe Bench managed to weasel out of dinner," I said. "Yeah, maybe," Dee Dee said. Wolf smiled as he looked up. From his seat, Dee Dee had the best angle on the front hall, and I watched his expression shift from curiosity to confusion. I spun around to see who was standing there, though I really should have guessed. "Greetings, O dungeony ones," Rose Holland called from the front door. "I come bearing gifts." She held up a bag of Funyuns and a 2-liter bargain brand red cream soda and smiled. Dee Dee's mouth hung open. I kept mine shut. Wolf took the snacks and gave Rose a hug, the second one in 2 days that I'd seen. "I wasn't sure you were going to make it," he said, escorting her to the kitchen. "You kidding? Hang out with the 3 world-class geekazoids like you on a Saturday night? How could a girl say no?" I could think of approximately 300 girls at Branton Middle School who would have, and in a hurry. They actually wouldn't have said no. They would have said, "Are you kidding?" or "Seriously?" or In fact, I couldn't think of a single other kid in the entire school who would have given the offer to sit around with the 3 of us rolling dice a second's thought. But Rose was obviously an exception. "Is that the pizza guy?" Wolf's mom called down the stairs. There was a pause. Wolf looked at the 2 of us as if he expected us to answer, but we were speechless. "No, Mom," he called up. "It's just a friend." It's important to keep things to yourself sometimes. If Jamie Juarez could have kept his superfluous nipple a secret, I'm sure he would have. It would have saved him a lot of grief. Same goes for Catherine McKinney's habit of chewing on her toenails, or Daniel P's unfortunate long-standing history of bedwetting that earned him the nickname of P. Diddley. And that's what happens when people find things out. Nothing good. Dungeons and Dragons was kind of like that. Forget that half of the kids in the school probably went around slaying dragons and stashing loot on their PlayStations or on their iPads. It's different when you actually have to roll dice. It's all about degrees of nerdiness. Mention you like to play board games and you're probably still okay. Break out the monster manual and start talking about the difference between 5th edition and 4th edition rule sets. You might as well give up on ever getting a date to the 8th grade dance. And that's why I was a little surprised to see Rose at the door. Dee Dee pulled Wolf aside, and the 3 of us had a quick huddle by the table. "This isn't gonna work," Dee Dee explained. "You're all at level 7. If she comes in now, she'll throw everything off balance. She'll muck it all up." It was a good excuse. Much better than saying that Wolf had crossed the line, inviting someone else into our game without permission. Someone who probably knew nothing about constitution checks and critical hits. Someone we'd have to teach everything to. Lunch was one thing, but this was different. "I don't want to ruin your game," Rose said, eavesdropping. "If it's a problem, I can just sit and watch." Sit and watch? Who in their right mind wants to sit and watch 3 guys play Dungeons and Dragons? "It's not a problem," Wolf said, breaking the huddle prematurely. "We'll just bump up your stats a little. You'll be fine, right, Dee Dee?" Wolf and Dee Dee stared at each other. It was up to the dungeon master. It was Wolf's house, but it was Dee Dee's game. Wolf got to decide if she stayed, but Dee Dee decided if she played. I was just glad neither of them was even looking at me. "She'll need to make a character," Dee Dee sighed. Meaning that there were 4 of us playing, just like always, but not exactly. We took our seats around Wolf's scarred kitchen table. Rose between Wolf and me, but closer to him, and Dee Dee patiently explained the absolute least she had to know to get started, while I poured myself a cup of the soda. "You'll need to choose an avatar," Dee Dee told her. He had a whole trove of little plastic figures. He pulled out the tallest, an orc war chief, hulking and muscular, holding an axe. "Maybe this one?" he said. Rose rifled through the box. "Oh, who's this little guy?" she asked, holding up a short, pudgy-looking figure about half the size of the one Dee Dee held. "That's a gnome," Dee Dee said. "They're good at making things." "Like origami?" Wolf added. "I'll be him then," Rose said. "What's his name?" "You get to decide," I told her. "You get to make up everything. Name, profession, backstory, all of it. It's the best part about it, really." At least I thought so. Of course, maybe that was just the poet talking. "So you're saying I can pretty much be anything I want?" "Within reason," Wolf said. "And within the roll of the dice," Dee Dee added. "In that case," she said, setting the tiny plastic gnome in front of her, "my name is Moose." We all looked at each other. We could hear the carbonation popping in our cups. I was no stranger to tense silences. I'd once witnessed my mother yelling at my father in the middle of Walgreens loud enough for everyone waiting at the pharmacy to hear, including the guy waiting in the drive-thru. The quiet that followed that incident wasn't quite this awkward. Rose shrugged off our stares. "What, you think I'm going to let some stupid little nickname get to me? Screw that. My name is Moose Wrathbringer, and I'm a spell-casting ninja with a history of carrying out covert assassinations for top-secret guilds, or something." "You can't do that," Dee Dee said. "You can't be a spell-casting ninja. For starters, you're a gnome, and the stat requirements, plus the rules for multi-classing, they prohibit you to—" He suddenly stopped talking, his mouth cinched tight, eyes bulging. Rose had reached out and taken his hand, just grabbed it from across the table. By the look on his face, you'd know that no girl had ever held Dee Dee's hand before. I watched his Adam's apple jump like he'd swallowed a grasshopper. "It's all right, Dee Dee," Rose said softly. "I can do it because you are the dungeon master, and you can do anything, which means I can be anything, even a spell-casting ninja gnome named Moose, because that's what it's all about. We don't have to play by the rules." She let go, and Dee Dee seemed to relax, though he moved his hand to his lap and kept it there. "Yeah, all right," he said, his voice catching. Wolf handed Rose some dice, and we created her character, deciding how strong and wise and smart she would be. "Stronger and smarter and wiser than the rest of you," she said with a grin. By the time Moose Wrathbringer was born, the pizza had arrived, and Wolf paid with his money that his mother left on the counter. Equipped with a slice of greasy pepperoni and a magic katana, Rose yelled for us to get our adventure on. Dee Dee talked us through the scenario, which started, predictably, with the three of us sitting around a table at a tavern. Eventually, we ended up in a graveyard and then descended, with typical foolish courage, into a crypt, where we came across a horde of zombies. I tried to sneak around them so that I could find another escape route, but I fell into a pit to a failed perception check. Wolf tried to sing a song that would paralyze the zombies, but it turned out they were all immune. Normally, this would be about the time that Bench would whip out his double-bladed battle axe of bleeding and go ballistic, but Garthrox the Barbarian was out to dinner with his parents, celebrating his catch. Which left us with Moose. "You guys are in trouble," Dee Dee said. Rose licked her fingers and pointed to the cardboard chits that represented the undead horde shuffling towards us. "All right, I got this. I cast a spell of absolute zombie annihilation on the whole lot of them, sending them back to the foul abyss or zombie-making factory from whence they came. You don't have a spell of zombie annihilation, Dee Dee informed her. How do I get one, then? There is no spell. Well, there should be, Rose insisted. What do I have? You have a spell of scorching touch and your sword. Spell of scorching touch. What is that? Is that like I light my finger on fire and go around pointing it at people? Pretty much, Wolf said. That sounds lame. I'll just use the sword. It's called a katana, Dee Dee said. Its name is Charlene. 6 eyebrows shot up around the table. Charlene? I questioned. Yeah, why? Is that a bad name for a sword? Rose asked. No, it's fine, I said. I just thought, you'd want to be like something more intense. Fine. Her full name is Charlene, the freaking crazy sharp sword that'll cut your head off if you make fun of her. Rose gave me a challenging look. Oh, that's way better, I said. Okay, Dee Dee sighed. But I'm telling you now, Charlene or no Charlene, you're all better off trying to run away. Rose took a Funyun out of the bag and crunched it mercilessly. You don't know me very well, do you? Just give me the dice. Dee Dee consulted the tables, compared Moose's stats to those of the zombies. Turns out she needed to roll a 15 on a 20-sided die to be successful. Otherwise, we were about to have our brains sucked out of our skulls. Rose blew on the die. Dee Dee asked her not to do that anymore, and she rolled a 20, scoring a critical hit and decapitating the first zombie in line. That's how I roll, she said with a smile, which would have been vomitously cheesy if all of us hadn't already said it ourselves at one point or another. After that, Moose Wrathbringer went into a rampage, improbably rolling one high number after another, slicing and dicing through imaginary undead, shouting, "Make way for Charlene!" with every toss of the die. She even stuck her flaming finger into the rotting guts of the last zombie, incinerating him from the inside out just for kicks. When it was finished, Moose had a pile of actually dead this time, undead at her feet, and the stares of 3 boys who couldn't believe what they just witnessed. Garthrox is a wuss, Dee Dee whispered in awe. Rose sat back smugly and popped another Funyun. Never mess with a ninja wizard princess. Wait, when did you become a princess? I asked. I just saved your sorry butt. I can be a princess if I want. I didn't argue. Instead, I went to take a drink and found my cup empty. Rose reached under the table for the bottle of soda and poured me what was left, and then tapped her cup to mine. To Charlene, she said. To being whatever you want to be, I said. And we all tapped cups. Then we descended farther into the crypt. By the time the adventure was finished, the Queen of Vampires, thoroughly staked, all the loot split between us, Wolf and I had both gained a level, and Rose had gained 2. Moose was almost where we were. It was still only 9 o'clock, so we eradicated what was left of the pizza, opened up a box of fudge brownies, and watched an old Doctor Who episode. It was pretty much the perfect night, and no one said anything about Bench. Maybe I was the only one thinking about him as we all squeezed in on Wolf's family room couch. Me and Dee Dee on the ends, Wolf and Rose in the middle. A little tight, but it was workable. Or maybe we were all thinking about him, but the game was over, and there was no room left on the sofa. That night, after Dee Dee's mom dropped me off at home, I tried to call Bench, just to see how dinner went, but his cell went straight to voicemail. I wasn't sure if I was going to tell him about Rose or not. I couldn't make up my mind, and I couldn't quite figure out what it meant that I couldn't make up my mind. Would Bench even care? And if he didn't care, what would that mean? I figured if he asked about the game, how the game went, I'd just say it was all right. Actually, funny thing, I'd say after a pause, Rose came over and joined in. She didn't use your character, though, don't worry. And then he'd ask something, maybe who invited her, or was it strange with her there, and I'd say it was fine, but it would have been nice if he were there. I wouldn't say instead. I wouldn't say to. I would just leave it at that. I definitely wouldn't tell him how much we laughed, how Rose gave Dee Dee such a hard time, saying her grandmother would make a better dungeon master and urging him to just make stuff up rather than taking 5-minute timeouts to page through his 300-page manuals. I wouldn't tell him how she beat all three of us at an arm wrestling contest afterwards, nearly throwing Wolf out of his chair. And I definitely wouldn't tell her how she told me her favorite American poet was Emily Dickinson, even though I've never heard of anyone else our age who even had a favorite American poet. And I wouldn't tell him how, when we all said goodbye at the end of the night, she gave out more hugs, not just to Wolf, to all three of us. I wouldn't tell him that I hugged her back, and not a limp one either. I stretched to reach all the way around. I would say it was just all right, because it was. I dialed his home phone and his mom picked up. She sounded apologetic. JJ's not home yet, Eric. He went out to dinner with some of his football friends. He should be home real soon, though. Want me to tell him you called? That's all right, Mrs. Jones, I said, and I hung up without saying goodbye. End of chapter 12.